So, like, a lot of this does, to me, feel like glazing. A lot of, like, the editorializing and whatnot, and, like, the opinions of the minter person and of the writers of the article. But, like, the actual historical information here of Kamala Harris's record is definitely useful. And in conjunction with Tim Walz's history of protecting queer rights, you know, together could be literally the most pro-queer, i.e. pro-freedom for queer people, presidential ticket in U.S. history. And I think that's something to, you know, be tepidly excited about. So Republicans are in a complete and total meltdown right now because the Democrats have decided to, and Kamala Harris specifically, has decided to pick the most likable guy in the country to be her vice president running mate for the upcoming presidential election. So well liked, in fact, that even Donald Trump likes him. Tim Walz, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, from Yashar Ali, breaking, ABC News has obtained audio where then President Trump expressed support for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's handling of the George Floyd protests. Which is funny because one of the major things that the Republican Party is trying to, you know, smear Tim Walz with is that apparently they think he was weak when it came to the BLM protests against police brutality. Donald Trump thought otherwise at the time. Perhaps, you know, he's had a recent life-changing event that's changed his mind. Who knows? But not only is he like the most liked person in the country, Tim Walz, he's also going to be potentially, along with Kamala Harris, but specifically for him, for VP, the most pro-queer, and in this specific context, pro-trans VP in contemporary American history, if not the entirety of it. And Kamala Harris is not that bad either. So I actually remember way back in the day, specifically 11 months ago, August 24th, 2023, so almost literally a year ago, I was kind of gassing this guy up a little bit because he had put out a video, or he had rather been in an interview where after, I think it was around after Minnesota, he signed the bill that came to his desk to give free lunch to everybody in school, which is just like a universally liked thing, like making sure kids don't go hungry. Oh, good heavens. We can't have that if we're Republicans. They were mad about it. But I was actually a big fan of it, and I was a big fan specifically of the kind of rhetoric he was using. And little did we know that, turns out, Constradamus, I'm able to predict the future a little bit. It always seems to be the case that, like, I will become a fan of something or somebody before they're cool, before they're popular, and then eventually it'll become more popular than I could ever have even expected, and it's just a product of the immense amount of sway I have over, like, the cosmic movements of the American experience. Anyway, I don't even remember what I was talking about here. What is it? Many other policies that Democrats talk about and should talk about that are this simple. The big difficulty is getting into power and then being able to utilize that power to do it. There are so many policies like this that are just uniquely understood to be good in the broader population. Use your power that you get, put the policy into effect. Ideally, your administration is a good one and is efficient with that. People will see the results of it, and then they won't want to give it away. They won't want to give it up. And that's similar, of course. Like, the biggest example of that is Social Security. Like, Social Security, I'm sure, had all manner of opposition from Republicans at the time. But now that it's been in place, and now that it's been seen as, like, an overall good for society in allowing elderly people to retire and live the rest of their days with dignity and respect, it's been universally loved. And any attempts to try to make it worse, which the Republicans have been trying to do for a long time, they try to raise the retirement age so that your grandma has to work even longer before she can get Social Security benefits and retire, to the point where, you know, the amount of stress that might put on somebody, depending on the job that they're doing, might even shorten their life. You know, that's no skin off the nose of any corporation. They get to squeeze a couple extra dollars out of Nana and out of Gam Gam, and, you know, it is what it is if she kicks the bucket. But, you know, generally speaking, it's not very popular when Republicans try to do this. And that's, you know, there's a whole bunch of other things that people might take for granted that were actually, like, vehemently opposed by corporate interests, and particularly Republicans and conservatives, that now just, you know, we understood to be the norm, that it's good to have them, you know? And they continue to fight against good things all the time. Like, quite literally, the Republican Party platform is, we're against good things, we want bad things to happen to you. That's the entirety of their platform. They want to make your life worse in every measurable way, control everybody, and force everybody to be the way that they want you to be. And if you can't possibly conform to how they want you to be, they might just get rid of you. We've seen, you know, conservative regimes of the past. And it's just not good, man. It's not good. People shouldn't like it, but you know, there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why people fall for the shit. Anyway, so let's see. I'm pretty sure we put the video in the comments. Now I'm genuinely curious. We will, of course, get into why, or how rather, he's so pro-trans and pro-queer. There it is. But I'm gonna put this here. Look at that a bit ago. Or in a bit, I should say. But in terms of the receipts for how pro-queer Tim Walz is, and we'll also get into, you know, Kamala Harris's record on, you know, LGBT issues, which is not that bad, all things considered. We have Erin Reed. Erin in the Morning is a publication. You should go subscribe to her Substack. Give her some money. She does really good work. We'll link to it, of course. Tim Walz took historic action to protect trans people. Now he's the Dem VP choice. On Tuesday, news broke that blah, blah, blah. On Tuesday, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris announced that her pick for vice president is Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. In recent years, as trans and queer people have come under attack from over 1,000 proposed bills, Walz is expected to serve as a source of optimism for LGBTQ+ people. The governor's long track record on LGBTQ+ rights positions him as a strong oppositional force against what has become a national attack on LGBTQ+ people, particularly transgender individuals. We've seen this, obviously, the most recent example is the boxer in the Olympics, whose name I forget, is it Iman? Who was apparently suspected to be trans, but isn't. Might potentially be intersex, we don't know. Either way, she was assigned female at birth, if that matters to anybody. She has lived as a woman her entire life, and she comes from Algeria, which is a country that does not allow for even homosexuality, much less trans people. So the idea that she'd be able to become their representative at the Olympics as a trans person, or that Algeria would like try to send a man in to fight against women for an easy dub, is not even close to potentially within the realm of possibility. Like, it's completely outside of the bounds of reality as we all know it, as us normal people know it. But, you know, they're still going to talk about it anyway because transphobia is a brain disease. It's a mental illness that'll rot your mind from the inside out and maybe even contribute to the rot of your domicile in terms of J.K. Rowling and the recent mold that's been seen to grow on her walls and her profile pictures and whatnot that she's recently changed to avoid the black mold allegations. It's not beating them, though. Walz has taken decisive action against attacks on transgender people in surrounding states, making Minnesota a refugee for those seeking care. In 2023, he signed an executive order protecting transgender people from out-of-state prosecution if they seek care within Minnesota's borders. So, much in the same way that a variety of blue states after the fall of Roe v. Wade, once a bunch of red states put, like, laws from the 1600s back into place to ban abortion because they want to be able to control women and anybody with the capacity for pregnancy and make sure that you stay, like, attached to a man to be able to help you, you know, if you've unfortunately become pregnant when you don't want to, or become a single mother and suffer the consequences of that, which will then have downstream negative effects potentially, depending on your socioeconomic status anyway, on the child as well, only furthering this cycle of shit. Not to say that you can't be a single parent and be a good parent, it's just that the odds are stacked against you, and we should do all we can to help them. Anyway, in the same way that a variety of blue states signed similar bills to protect people from prosecution if they were to cross state lines for abortion, because they can't get it in their home state, because of the, in my view, and in the view of a variety of Supreme Court justices that are currently on the bench that have now contradicted themselves, violates their constitutional rights, you know, you're able to go to a blue state, get an abortion should you need that necessary health care, and not be able to be prosecuted in your home state for having done so, which is a universally good thing. The executive order also issued a bulletin to health insurance companies mandating coverage and initiating investigations into health insurance denials in the state. In 2024, Walz signed a bill banning the gay and transgender panic defense, very based, to do this. The so-called, for those of you who don't know, the gay and trans panic defense, quote unquote, quote unquote, quote unquote, is like the laughably absurd idea that, oh, you know, I'm the lawyer defending the person who killed the trans woman, and the reason why is because he thought that she was a woman, and it turns out she was a woman. She was just a different kind of woman that was for some reason damaging to his self-esteem, and the only way that he knew how to deal with that, you know, and to potentially avoid the negative consequences in society from his transphobic friends and family members of being potentially seen with a trans person and have that reflect negatively on them, even though that shouldn't be the case, is to kill the person. And that defense has actually worked and gotten people either reduced sentences or no sentences, which is the most absurd thing you could possibly think of. Like, can you imagine somebody was hooking up with somebody else? You had there was a Christian man hooking up with a Muslim woman, but he didn't know she was Muslim. And then it turns out, like in the deed, you know, instead of saying, oh God, it's so good, she says, Allah, it's so good. And he's like, huh? finds out that she's a Muslim and fucking kills her because of that, because he doesn't want to be seen dating a Muslim woman from his, his friends and whatnot, or he's like feels an immense amount of shame because he's like wretchedly Islamophobic and racist to brown people, and I guess this was a white passing brown person in this instance, or they could just be white, like white Muslims exist. Anyway, and then he fucking killed him, like, it would be a similar defense. Like, oh, I didn't know that this person was actually a different religion than the one I had, and I have all these preconceived notions about the kind of people that practice this kind of religion, that pray to the same God as me, but I digress. So I killed the bitch because, like, what are you supposed to do? Be a normal person and be like, oh, shit, I don't care what religion you are, and then maybe even in a worse sense, but still not killing somebody, being like, oh shit, like I'm kind of like weird, and I only want to date other Christians, so like it's not gonna work out. I'm glad to have met you, but we probably won't be meeting again. Best of luck in your further endeavors. Even that is more normal. And then the worst possible case of fucking killing someone, like, that's not a defense that should ever be in the mind of a judge to be in any way close to reasonable. It's literally the same thing. And I say literally the same thing. You can have like a semantic argument. Well, one is like a biological thing. So like if it's a trans woman and she still has a penis, and maybe, it's the fact that there's a penis there and not a vagina, and that causes all kinds of confusion in the person, blah, blah, blah. It still doesn't justify them killing her, or them, or him, or it, frankly. Like, it still doesn't justify the killing. And I say that it's literally the same thing, not necessarily because, like, oh, it's one-to-one. Religion is the same as gender identity in terms of, like, the semantic definitions of the two. I mean, it's literally the same thing in that the religion that you identify with and the gender identity you identify as in an ideal society should be seen in the same level of who gives a fuck, right? Like, the level of severity of someone being a certain religion or a certain gender identity, it's literally, they're both social concepts, right? They've both been constructed by human beings into existence. And because of this, they have the same level, in my view, of import. You can view them on the same level. It's like finding out that the person you're fucking is like into like American football, and when they said that they were into football, you thought they meant soccer, but now that you realize it's American football, you fucking kill them. Like, doesn't work like that, man. So that's what I'm saying when I say it's literally the same thing, because I think that they should be seen at similar levels of severity. And like the response to it all is like, who gives a fuck? Right? Like, if it turns out that your partner is fucking Jewish and you're goddamn Christian, like, it shouldn't be a problem for you. But, like, if it is, the furthest that should go would be like, oh, I'm fucking weird, so, like, I only want to date another Christian. I'm glad to have met you. Maybe see you again as friends later or something. That's how that should be. The worst case scenario should be like, we're not fucking anymore. Sorry. And, like, you're still weird for it, but, like, it's definitely more understandable than fucking killing somebody. Anyway, this defense is often used to help individuals avoid murder charges or receive lighter sentences by asserting that they were, quote, deceived by a romantic partner who was gay or transgender. According to one study, the transgender panic defense has been used at least 351 times. So 351 times somebody kills a fucking person because they're so insecure in their own sexuality. It's the idea of being with a person that they see as a man even though they're a woman, or whatever. Because frankly, I don't think it's shameful to fuck a man if you're a man. In fact, I think if you're scared of that, you're a coward and less of a man. Anyway, 351 people have been killed, or even more potentially, who knows, a fucking orgy transpanic defense, have been able to get reduced sentences or no sentence. Like, that's not justice, man. That is almost, like, in the most subjective way I can view it, a miscarriage of justice. I feel like you could explain this to a normal person and be like, yeah, that's pretty fucked up. If you kill a person just because you assumed that they had a certain set of genitals and it turns out that they had the other, like, I think, in my view, like, you would just be like, oh, I'm not into that, sorry. I don't mean to hurt your feelings, it's just that's not the shit I'm into. See you later. And, like, maybe there's hurt feelings, but, like, at least nobody's dead at the end of it. Like, I feel like that should be the normal person's response, and if it's not, you gotta get your brain checked. Walz's pro-LGBTQ plus record goes back much further than his time as governor. In 1999, he sponsored the first gay-straight alliance at his high school while working as a teacher. In 1999, brother. That's before some of you motherfuckers were born. I was born in 95, so I was 4 years old at the time. In Congress, he co-sponsored the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act and voted to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. For any of you Zoomers out there, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was like a somewhat coded way to be like, yeah, we don't want queers in military, so like, don't ask what people's sexuality is and don't tell people what your sexuality is. Because if it turns out that you are queer, you might suffer a variety of consequences up to and potentially including violence. Not necessarily from the military itself, though you could be discharged. There's a lot of history of that kind of shit. And it was just like the Republicans' moderate approach to hating queer people and wanting them to suffer. when it comes to the military. The main reason why it wasn't just a ban on queer people in the military was not because, like, Republicans are good people or whatever, and, like, they don't want to ban queer people, but, like, maybe they're buckling under the pressure of their constituency who are rabid dogs who want to kill queer people. It's not that. It's because the military wants numbers, and they don't care if you're gay, straight, whatever. You get thrown in the meat grinder, and you're able to, you know, pull a trigger the same way as everyone else, and you're able to fight for the increased profit margins of corporations by fighting for natural resources in another country and blowing up innocent people, you know? Doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter the kind of fucking you're doing, you're still able to be thrown in the meat grinder, so it is what it is. They just don't want to have any problems. So that shit's gay. In the bad way. Having a vice president with a track record of protecting trans and queer people will be important for LGBT plus members of the Democratic Party. Currently, 24 states have passed bans on transgender care for youth and some adults. Nationally, Republicans are attempting to negotiate over 50 anti-LGBTQ plus provisions into the national budget, which is insane. Like, I think what should be negotiated into the national budget is, like, being able to put fucking food on your table. You know, not even if you just work a job or 2 jobs, but, like, generally speaking, you should be able to not be starving. You know, the national budget, we should allocate it to building more housing and potentially stopping landlords from hoarding all the housing and not even renting it or selling it to anybody and just using it as a speculative asset when there are literally homeless people outside that potentially could be using it or other, you know, publicly subsidized housing. Anyway. Of course, you know, it's more important for Republicans to worry about the genitalia of a bunch of people and the kind of sex they may or may not be having. That's definitely much more important to worry about. And not even necessarily sex, just like the kind of people that they have a romantic love with. Like, it could be asexual. But if it's a man and a man, they're not fucking, but they're still, like, holding hands. It's too much for them. You can't be doing that. Including bans on federal funding for any entity offering gender-affirming care for trans youth, as well as trans military bans for dependent care, threatening to shut down the government over such provisions. Like, literal insane person shit. It doesn't affect you in any way whatsoever. It's literally just a way that you've found to potentially fearmonger to your base because trans people are one of the safest minorities to target openly without any dog whistles, even though they still dog whistle a little bit. Openly be bigoted toward and not have it hurt you that much. You know, you can't really do that as much with black and brown people. You gotta be much more covert with it. Now, the mask has been peeled back a little bit. They don't use as many dog whistles as they used to be because they're consolidating behind the idea that they might not never have to run for election again and just have an authoritarian dictatorship in the future should, you know, the plans of the Republican Party come to pass because they know they can't win popular elections. Anyway, so, like, they're kind of not really caring about the dog whistles so much. But, like, still, nobody fucking cares, dude. It's crazy that people would care about, like, oh, somebody else, they were born a man or whatever, and now they're, like, a woman. Why the fuck do I care, man? Like, anti-queer bills aren't putting food on my goddamn plate. Anti-queer bills aren't what's gonna save me from having my wife give birth to our newborn twins and having to go back to work the next day because we don't have paternal leave even in this country. Walz's history of fighting against anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ provisions could aid the White House in opposing such policies should Harris be elected president. Poggers. As for LGBTQ plus allies and organizations, they appear happy with the pick. Myself included. I am the LGBTQ plus organization. Kellyanne Robinson of HRC Human Rights Commission, I believe, stated, quote, her pick of Governor Walz sends a message that a Harris-Walz administration will be committed to advancing equality and justice for all. A Metallica reference. See that? That is the choice we are faced with in America. A Trump-Vance administration that would demonize LGBT plus people, terrorize our families, send our rights and freedoms back to the land before time, and install Project 2025, or a Harris-Walz administration that will fight for our freedoms, defend our families, and make America a place where people don't just get by, but can get ahead. And also, you know, one that is just like, yeah, you can be trans and we don't give a fuck. In fact, we may even help you be the person you want to be in our healthcare. Poggers. Pretty good. And it turns out, and this is a Slate article from July 29, 2024 that was linked to by chat, so if you want to get mad at anybody if any of this ends up not aging too well, given if she's elected to presidency and whatever policies are passed or whatever, blame the chat, not me. But I did read some of it. It seems pretty good. Kamala Harris's surprising record on trans rights. Some leftists don't say blah, 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 blah. As Kamala Harris rose to national prominence over the years, lawyer and lifelong LGBTQ advocate Shannon Minter felt a growing sense of alarm. Not about Harris's success, but about what was being said about her by Minter's fellow transgender activists and writers. Quote, Harris's work has contributed to some of the most violent conditions faced by trans people, wrote ACLU lawyer Chase Strangio in 2019 during Harris's presidential primary run. Harris, quote, has a concerning record of endangering our community's most marginalized members, a Them magazine article warned. Absurd, Minter told Slate. It's just wrong. It is wrong. Now, I will say, I've seen this Chase Strangio person on Twitter. Some of their takes have been good. We could go further into like the arguments for that. We'll link the article in the comments, or rather in the description if you want to go through it yourself. It could be the case that there might be some blind spots in the article we're reading, but by and large, I don't know that it's going to be disqualifying, considering the alternative. But it is stuff that you should be aware of because you want to be able to pressure the potential Harris-Walz administration into being as good as they possibly can be, for a variety of marginalized groups, not just queer people. Anyway, Minter should know he became famous for facing off against Kenneth Starr in California's Supreme Court, arguing against Prop 8, the ballot initiative that would have banned same-sex marriage in the state in 2009. But he was there in 2006 when Harris, not yet a national figure, drew together a coalition of cops, prosecutors, academics, and activists. You lost me with the first option, maybe even somewhat the second option, considering the history of prosecutors and the way that they hand out sentences. But academics and activists? Okay. To talk about how to protect the human rights of trans people in criminal courts. Quote, "It was historic," recalled Minter. "She just genuinely cared about the issue." We're glazing a little bit, I can tell. But the historic information here, so long as it's not being misrepresented, and I don't think that it is from what I saw, should be POG-champ. But the criticism Harris has faced hasn't died, even though many transgender activists and writers are skeptical that Harris really has their back. It didn't help that Biden administration came out against surgery for trans minors in late June before reversing course this month. In a way, the skepticism is understandable, and I should say, when it comes to surgery for trans minors, the kinds of surgeries that are being done are so extensively rare and are done after extensive consult with the parents, the child, the doctors, mental health professionals, etc., in an ideal system that would be the case to make sure that this is something that the child absolutely does want and that won't lead to any potential regret. And even if it does, hip replacements have a fucking shitload of regret. So as long as, there was informed consent with the parents and the doctors and all this kind of shit, should be good. And regret rates for trans care exceedingly low, much lower than a variety of other surgeries like hip replacements and all this kind of thing. Like even elective surgeries that cis people will get, like breast reductions or enhancements or whatever, other cosmetic surgeries. So it could be the case that some trans people end up understanding themselves to not be trans and not want it. And it also could be the case that a cis person could understand themselves to want bigger breasts and then realize that they don't. It's just the way the world works. It's called being a human being and changing and evolving. But ideally, you do all you can to make sure that the choice that's being made is the correct one. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, it seems to be. Anyway, it should be said that it's so rare to begin with. But the problem with this kind of framing that I don't like, and obviously this article is not going to convince any Republicans, it's not directed at Republicans, explicitly so, but the way that Republicans and conservatives bring it up is that they suggest that, the children's genitals are being mutilated, and that's what the Democrats want, because for some reason the genitalia of children, and even other strangers that don't happen to be children, but a lot of them happen to be children for weird reasons for the conservatives, always on their mind. So it's the first thing they're going to bring up, but that doesn't happen, It simply doesn't. Factually speaking, the only thing that might happen would be top surgery for somebody that might go through a puberty and then have that puberty make them develop breasts. But you're not getting bottom surgery. You're not getting your penis turned into a vagina as a kid. It's not happening. It has never happened and should never happen. Primarily because it wouldn't be as effective of a surgery, for one, and for two, there's no need for it. I don't know that there's much reason for the person to not wait until a little bit later, and it just simply doesn't happen. So it's a non-issue, but it's what they'll bring up because they want to try to fearmonger and be like, oh well, the Democrats, they want to cut your child's penis off, and it's a very strange tactic that doesn't seem to resonate well with normal people. It makes them seem really fucking weird and obsessed, but that's what they bring up and that's how they bring it up. In a way, the skepticism is understandable for a politician viewed with suspicion by many leftists for her, quote, tough-on-crime years as California's Attorney General and her selection as vice president to proud moderate Joe Biden. But her record is clear. Harris has been a strong advocate and progressive for transgender rights for 20 years, and she started this work long before it entered the center of national politics. Which is, definitely something you should give somebody their flowers for. Because getting into this shit and trying to understand it way early on before it was the flavor of the year, very good. I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of proactive kind of thinking in that regard to try to protect vulnerable minorities. Pretty good. And even if they're not the most educated at the time, because a lot of people weren't, and they may not even go about it in the best way possible given that context, still trying. So that's nice. In the mid-2000s, trans rights were barely on the radar of most politicians. They should never be on the radar except for protecting the rights of trans people to be the people they want to be. In 2004, Hillary Clinton was still tepid on marriage equality, pronouncing marriage a, quote, sacred bond between a man and a woman from the Senate floor. Man, it really wasn't her turn. That same year, Minter sat in a California courtroom as lawyers argued that a teenager's transgender status had justified her killing. So this is the so-called trans panic defense, which is a bunk idea to justify the murders of people and get people off sentencing for them or reduce sentencing. It should never have been ever accepted by any judge ever, and the idea that it has should, in my view, call that judge's qualifications as a judge into question. I digress. Two of the men who murdered 17-year-old Gwen Araujo after realizing she was trans ended up being convicted only of second-degree murder. Two others pleaded to no contest to lesser charges. Throughout the process, Minter and other trans lawyers tried to reach out to the prosecutors to help them counter the defense's, quote, gay panic strategy, he said. Quote, I and others tried so hard to work with those prosecutors and they were not interested in that, he said. It was frustrating. As the Araujo case made its way through the courts, another prosecutor, San Francisco's then District Attorney Kamala Harris, was under attack from the local police. An officer had been killed and Harris refused to seek the death penalty for his killer. Cop unions were predictably furious. One leader accused Harris of being in a, quote, ivory tower and having, quote, no clue to the reality of the street. Her own political mentor, Senator Dianne Feinstein, also publicly pressured Harris to back down, which is just very funny. If you know, you know about that old witch. Anyway. While Harris stood her ground, she was also following the Araujo case. It wasn't in Harris's jurisdiction and she had no personal stake, but she already had a record of looking out for the LGBTQ+ community. She had performed marriage rites for gay couples right after such ceremonies began in California, started a hate crimes unit dedicated to protecting queer teenagers, and even spoke at her city's 3rd annual Trans March, where she was honored as having, quote, championed transgender rights. So in July of 2006, after Araujo's killers had been sentenced, Harris convened a 2-day national conference to discuss ways to counter the, quote, gay panic defense, drawing together law enforcement personnel, academics, activists, and even the prosecutor and defense lawyers from the Araujo case. Minter was there. He recalls being stunned that Harris went out of her way to address not just gay panic defenses in general, but specifically their deployment against trans victims. Quote, that was so unexpected and extraordinary and impressive, so we're glazing, but I mean, it seems to be the case. He said last week in a phone call from Texas, where he works as a legal director for the San Francisco-based National Center for Lesbian Rights. Why just lesbian rights? Why not gay men, huh? Misandry at work, I bet. That's a joke. The conference, quote, was genuinely focused on how to address these issues and problems, he said. It had no flavor of performativity. I just remember thinking at the time, this is the real deal. Obviously, this is somebody's opinion. Actions speak louder than words, so we can see about the actions. Minter says Harris didn't go into detail about why the issue was important to her. Later, in her memoir, she wrote only that she found the defense strategy ludicrous because literally any normal person should. But she told a reporter at the time, quote, hopefully this conference symbolizes the fact that we take seriously these crimes and our responsibility to protect these victims, and that the victims will be treated with dignity because we understand who they are and understand their experience. She added of the gay panic defense, quote, we can't outlaw it, but we can combat it. Foreshadowing. Over the course of her career, however, she would indeed help to outlaw the defense. In 2014, as California's Attorney General, she co-sponsored legislation to ban panic defenses in court. The passage of that bill made California the first state to do so, and the language of the bill became a model for other states up to the present day. Last week, Michigan became the 20th state to pass such a ban. So this is why California is a shithole, I imagine, for many Republicans, because a lot of them would like to be able to get away with murder in a variety of contexts, and I would imagine in this one as well, but this makes it so that they cannot, which is pretty good, I think. Later, as a U.S. Senator in 2018, she again co-sponsored legislation that would ban the defense nationally. By this time, Republicans were working to make trans rights a wedge issue and held the Senate majority. The bill did not pass. So Republicans stood in the way of a bill that would make it so that you're not allowed to murder people because they are trans and you happen to be in some way romantically or sexually involved with them. Not good, folks. Not good. While it's difficult to determine exactly how Harris has influenced the rest of the Biden administration on trans rights, and though there have been grave missteps in the past 3.5 years, this White House has made admirable progress on a few fronts. A law to curb trans conversion therapy, a move to gender-neutral passports, restoring protections against discrimination in healthcare, and more. Harris has, at the very least, been a public face for LGBTQ+ initiatives, doing events like a surprise Pride Month speech at the Stonewall Inn last year. The pursuit of equal justice for trans people is a sustained through line in the presumptive nominee's career, yet when Harris launched her first presidential bid, Strangio and other trans critics described her record as mixed at best, dangerous at worst. In part, their criticism stems simply from the fact that Harris was a part of the carceral state. Quote, I will never trust prosecutors whose job it is to send people to cages, Strangio wrote in his critique. And I mean, I think that's a bit of a simplification, but you should be distrustful of the people who have the power to strip freedom away from other people, because there are going to be prosecutors who will then neglect to prosecute the killers of trans people in so-called trans panic defenses, quote unquote. So, I think it's fair to be skeptical of any public official whose job it is to oversee the rights and well-being of people, generally speaking. So, fair enough. It's true that Harris is far from a prison abolitionist. Cringe. She will be unlikely to satisfy arch-leftists, and Very Libby article all of a sudden. And if elected, will surely do things that the radicals wouldn't. But that doesn't mean she's motivated by a desire to oppress. Quote, I always got the impression, just this tool to solve the law is a tool to help defend vulnerable people. She wanted to use the power of the state's criminal law to help people who are preyed upon and harmed. So, like, a lot of this does, to me, feel like glazing. A lot of, like, the editorializing and whatnot. And, like, the opinions of the Minter person, Shannon Minter, and of the writers of the article. But, like, the actual historical information here of Kamala Harris's record is definitely useful. And in conjunction with Tim Walz's history of protecting queer rights, you know, together could be literally the most pro-queer, i.e. pro-freedom for queer people, presidential ticket in U.S. history. And I think that's something to, you know, be tepidly excited about. You know, I'm a fan of that. You know, I will definitely be looking for money to be put where their mouth is, for sure. But it definitely does give me a very rare resource, hope, a little bit. Not too much, but a fair amount. And more than I would have otherwise if Joe Biden was still in the race. I definitely, and I have no reason to necessarily, I definitely think that Tim Walz is going to be the biggest proponent of that, of the pro-queer aspect of this shit. Because he, generally speaking, seems to be more vocal about it. He seems to have done a lot more because he had governorship power and whatnot in Minnesota. But, I mean, it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. So that's pretty cool. Continuing on, we also have the way that the Trump administration is now responding to Tim Walz being the VP pick. Trump's first attack on Walz, quote, he's very into transgender. Well, frankly, I'm very into transgender as well. So you're just making me like the guy more. What the fuck does that mean? Oh, man. Walz's record from Fox and Friends. Oh, boy. Governor Tim Walz's record. Under his leadership, Minnesota rolled out state-subsidized healthcare for illegal immigrants. Oh, good heavens. These are evil people. How could you do this? Signed a law making Minnesota a sanctuary for children seeking gender-affirming care. Quote, unquote. It's in scare quotes, of course. I feel like to any normal person, like if it's not your kid, I don't know that you would have much of an opinion on it. If it is your kid, I would hope that you would like talk to the doctors and professionals on the issue and maybe do some education yourself from non-biased sources to understand the whole thing better and then make a decision and not reflexively through cowardice or insecurity go along with the fear-mongering. Signed a law making abortion a, quote, fundamental right. It's just, like, these are all W's, obviously, at least these three. I haven't read the fourth one yet. But of all the ones that I've seen, putting this up in a way that, like, they're making it, these are, like, they think they're posting his L's, essentially. Like, this is put up for the Fox News audience to get mad at. Signed a law making abortion a, quote, fundamental right. And fundamental right in scare quotes. Brother, the only people that this appeals to is a voter base that is becoming ineligible to vote as time goes on because they are aging out, my friend. You know, it's an ever-shrinking pool of potential voters that are going to give a fuck about this shit. You're not going to have them forever, which is why, of course, they've been trying and have been working toward with the Federalist Society to stage a hostile takeover of the judiciary branch because they understand that they might not be able to win the executive branch through actual democratic processes and maybe potentially even the legislative branch. At the very least, they can rule from the bench through conservative activist judges like they did with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, with Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, fucking Brett Kavanaugh. What's the other dickhead I'm thinking about? One of the other ones. Was it Gorsuch? Overturned and contradicted themselves to the point where, like, Republicans have not been able to pass a ban on abortion, and the bans on abortion have been unconstitutional and has been super precedent in the Supreme Court and has been claimed to be as much by a variety of the same Supreme Court justices who have voted to overturn it. Yeah, Amy Coney Barrett as well, yes. Like, that's the entire project of the Republican Party now. They're not really interested in winning democratic elections in any capacity. They want to either rule from the bench or fix elections so much so in concert with, like, the Electoral College, which is already a participation trophy of Republicans and essentially election fixing, in my view, and should not exist. And you could also make a similar argument for the Senate, considering the outsized amount of power it gives a variety of states that have, like, 2 people in it. I digress. It's the only way that they can attain power, and they know it because their fucking demographic is aging out. And younger generations are contradicting historical trends of becoming more conservative as they age and are actually becoming more progressive as they age, which is a good sign for, you know, normal people wanting to live better lives. Pretty good stuff. During COVID, pushed lengthy school closures and set up a hotline for people to report rule breakers during, like, a very contagious public health emergency that was worldwide. I mean, a lot of the people that might be in a position to get mad about this have died from COVID, unfortunately. It definitely targeted elderly people in such a way because of the fact that they're older and their body can't fight back against it more pre-vaccine and even with it, but it definitely helps a tremendous amount. And a lot of their voter base just isn't going to get vaccinated either because it can be a culture war issue. Like, the people that are still around to get mad at this literally just dodged the bullet. The rest of them are fucking dead, which is, like, dreadful. And ideally would not have happened if it didn't become a culture war talking point. Anyway. On Wednesday morning, Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump launched his first attacks on Tim Walz, the Democratic Party's vice presidential pick. Trump criticized Walz for being too supportive of transgender rights, the horror. These sentiments have been echoed by other prominent Republican campaigners, including some from organizations known for spending millions in failed campaigns against candidates with pro-LGBTQ+ and pro-transgender records, like in Michigan. They spent like $50 million or something on races in Michigan, basing a lot of the talking points that they had in the Republican Party on being anti-trans, and it completely fucking ruined those races, and the progressive option, the Democrats won, overwhelmingly so. It seems like being like pathologically obsessed with trans people who are simply just living their lives isn't really a winning rhetorical strategy, but they can't help themselves. The segment on Fox and Friends opened with a list of things that make a Harris Walz ticket, quote, too liberal, according to the panel. Trump then took to answering questions from the hosts. When asked about his reaction to the Governor Tim Walz joining Kamala Harris as the Democratic VP pick, Trump responded, quote, I would say my reaction is I can't believe it. I never thought this would be the one that was picked. I think So, say what you will about the guy, Josh Shapiro. I initially was a bit more on the Shapiro train when he won in Pennsylvania because he beat a Republican who literally said that if that Republican got elected to the governorship and was governor during the 2020 presidential election, he would have done all of in his power to rig the vote for Donald Trump and actually help his coup go through, on January 6th. So that's not good. And the fact that it's a Democrat there that is not in favor of that is a good thing. And it seemed like he had a bit of charisma to go with it. So I was like, yeah, maybe it could be a good VP pick. Turns out his man's got a lot of skeletons in his closet. So I think the Republican Party probably wanted Shapiro more. They obviously wanted Joe Biden to stay in because it's the easiest person to run against. The fact that Joe Biden won the first time and that they lost to a fucking walking corpse is absurd. An insane indictment on the Republican Party. And also the best case scenario at the time was Republicans losing because it's always the best case scenario. But it seems like that they had a lot more Oppo research on Shapiro and a lot of shit they could have thrown at him that might have stuck a little bit more. And against Tim Walz, they have quite literally nothing. They just post his W's, and it's very funny. And obviously, like, I'm within a certain bubble, as are, everybody else. But I like to think that their weird messaging that the Kamala Harris campaign has been using, that was started, coincidentally, by Tim Walz before he was even a potential thought to be VP, I think is going to resonate fairly well with normal people in America, and then, therefore, make a lot of the shit the Republicans are talking about be seen through that lens, and then only hurt the Republicans more. So I just think that they wanted Shapiro to be the one. But anyway. Then he turned to Walz's record on transgender people, because this is the thing that working people are really worried about, Bob Johnson, who's working 2 jobs to keep food on the plate for his wife and 5 kids, he's really worried about where the money's going to come from to pay for their next childcare bill. And he just knows that trans people being able to exist in comfort is going to... it's stopping that from happening, all right? Quote, there's never been a ticket like this. This is a ticket that would want this country to go communist immediately, if not sooner. Okay, old man. We want no security, no anything. He's very heavily into transgender. Anything transgender, he thinks is great. It's a convincing argument, man. He's really campaigning hard against this guy. Like, devoid of any kind of actual tangible attacks. Like, not even quippy one-liners. Like, he's like a fish out of water right now. He's very out of character. Seems like he might see the writing on the wall, though nothing's a sure plan, and you should always act as if you're losing in a race that you want to win, and operate as fiercely as you can to achieve the win. The attacks on Walz's record on transgender rights primarily centers around a 2023 executive order that designated Minnesota as a safe state or refuge for transgender people seeking care across state lines. Before this executive order, transgender individuals who obtained care in Minnesota could potentially have their health records subpoenaed by attorney generals in other states. This notably happened with Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas, who's an absolute fucking pig dog for the Republican Party, and has done all manner of horrible shit in concert with the governor, Greg Abbott, including but not limited to putting fucking razor wire around buoys at the border so that migrants fleeing a variety of Latin American states that are in disrepair, primarily because of the meddling of the United States for fucking resources like bananas, that's why they're called banana republics, would get stuck in them. And also because, there's just bad leadership there as well that may not be influenced by the United States. So that people get caught in the razor wire and drown, among other demonic things, who attempted to obtain transgender patient records from trans youth who received care at Seattle Children's Hospital, where a nearly identical law prevented those records from being subpoenaed. Importantly, most safe state and shield laws protections apply not only to transgender care, but also to abortion care. In April 2023, the Biden administration finalized a rule to protect individuals' contraception and reproductive healthcare records from investigations across state lines, asserting that such investigations violated patient privacy, which it does, especially when the healthcare was legally obtained in another state. Republican vice presidential pick J.D. Vance signed a letter opposing this rule change, asserting that states had the authority to pursue individuals crossing state lines to provide or access care. For the crime of getting health care, they want to obtain your records, which in my view contradicts patient privacy, and then use that to bring criminal charges against you for, once again, the crime of making decisions about your own body that they do not like. Still, Republicans continued attacking Walz's record on transgender rights. On Wednesday, Gregory Price, the communications director for the far-right State Freedom Caucus Network, said of Walz, quote, he made Minnesota a, quote, sanctuary state for child sex changes. That is definitely a way you could word it if you wanted to misrepresent the issue entirely and make it so that people who don't know what the fuck you're talking about feel strange about it and therefore scared. John Schwepp, the policy director at the American Principles Project, which has spent tens of millions on anti-trans ads with little success, stated, quote, the trans industry got its guy. The so-called trans industry, the infinite cabal of transgenders in a smoky back room who secretly control everything in the country, if not the world, got their guy. Meanwhile, trans people make up a fraction of 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 a percent of the global population and the United States population. It is one of the most minority groups among minority groups. But, like, of course, you know, it's so powerful that the lobbying it was able to do got a VP nominee in place. Attacks on transgender people have little record of electoral success, with similar efforts failing in many campaigns over the last few elections. In elections where Republicans made trans people the major issue, the Republican Party faltered. 70% of Moms for Liberty and Project 1776 candidates lost their races in 2023. In Kentucky, the American Principles Project spent millions on anti-trans ads against Democratic Governor Andy Beshear, who was also a potential for a VP candidate for Kamala Harris, who won by a larger margin than his first election. Kentucky is a deep red state, mind you. It's the one that looks like a chicken wing. Or a drumstick, I should say, for you non-Americans out there. Other losses Republicans have suffered on this issue occurred in the Virginia legislature elections, the Arizona governor's race, the Michigan legislature elections, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, the Walker-Warnock Senate race, and in dozens more places. Furthermore, recent polling from Gallup, Navigator, and LA Times indicates fading public support for such laws, with huge majorities of respondents seeing them as a distraction and opposing bans on trans youth care. Because it's literally just a distraction. And it's nice to see that people are starting to see through that. It doesn't affect you at all. The people that it does affect overwhelmingly affects them positively. And whenever any kind of thing occurs there, it is done with the consent of all parties involved to the standards of care that are based on the scientific and medical consensus on the issue and has nothing to do with your fucking worldview or insecurity, man. Worry about some other shit, like getting some bitches on your dick. God damn. Nevertheless, it appears that Trump and Republican operatives will intensify their anti-transgender attacks against the Democratic ticket in the 2024 election. A strategy may signal desperation in the wake of falling poll numbers, especially after an attempted assassination on the guy. Nobody gives a fuck about it. Some people are speculating on if it ever happened at all or if the footage we saw was AI generated. I don't think that's the case, but many people are suggesting that it could be. I would stand firmly in the idea that it's not, but you know. Seems like not a lot of people give a fuck about it anymore, so who knows? Anyway, that was a joke. Keep in mind that Beshear's first race was against a zero-charisma dude trying to take away pensions from teachers, so with the second race being an even wider margin, yeah, seems good. It never happened. We made it up. This assassination attempt was invented by a writer. Nope, not a chance. We're talking about a different one, of course. The assassination attempt on JFK, for instance, was in fact a fabrication. It did happen, though. It just wasn't... It was the CIA, okay? It wasn't some rando. Like, if the CIA was at fault for the Trump thing, like, it wouldn't have gone the way it did, which is, in my view, clears them from suspicion. JFK's head just did that. You know, some people are saying that, too. Anyway, sorry. There's other shit here. Some from Sam Stryker on Twitter. Tim Walz was an enlisted soldier in the Minnesota National Guard in 1999, a defensive coordinator of the Mankato West High School football team. A student at the school where Walz taught geography wanted to start a gay-straight alliance. This was 3 years after the president, a Democrat, signed a law forbidding same-sex marriage. Soldiers suspected of being gay in Walz's own unit could be discharged from the military, but Walz, now Minnesota's Democratic candidate for governor, has seen the bullying some students endured and agreed to be the group's faculty advisor. Quote, "It really needed to be the football coach who was the soldier and was straight and was married," Walz said. In other words, he would be a symbol that disparate worlds could coexist peacefully. And that's what he's there for. Like, he's literally a DEI hire for the Kamala Harris ticket because she is a black woman. It was the quest to find the perfect saltine, and they found him, it would seem. And God bless him for it. Anyway, I will say this. So this is good rhetoric from him. So there's a lot to be said about his speech at the first speech that he makes at a rally when he's now VP nominee or whatever. This one in specific, I think, is a good way to format these arguments, generally speaking, but specifically from somebody like him.
Some of us in here are old enough to remember. I see you down there. I see those old white guys. Some of us are old enough to remember when it was Republicans who were talking about freedom.
The thing is, like, they were only talking about it. They never actually meant it. Historically speaking, they have not meant it at all whatsoever.
It turns out now...
Not just now. I understand the framing. It's a more moderate way to talk about it, which I'm a fan of, in this specific context of giving a speech like this as an old white guy. But it's not now. It's always been. It is, a fact, though, that the Republican Party doesn't talk about freedom as much anymore.
It was Republicans who were talking about freedom.
Maybe Abraham Lincoln. Oh, maybe, yeah. Maybe he's talking about Republicans pre-party switch, which were effectively modern-day Democrats in terms of how the parties have shaked out. He's that old. Funnily enough, he's literally the same age as Kamala Harris. Just by the way, some may say it's further evidence of the inherent inferiority of the ham sandwich race. Sorry, it's a joke. I happen to be half ham sandwich myself. Some of my best friends as well.
Now, what they meant was the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. In Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own damn business.
True. It's good. The people like it.
These guys are after my heart chanting, mind your own damn business. That feels good, so thank you.
It's good stuff. In many ways, Tim Walz is a better politician than Kamala Harris. He's got a powerful voice, which is unfortunately important. He's got good rhetorical strategies that I've appreciated even before he was the VP candidate. Kamala's not as bad as, other people make it out to be. And now that she's the presidential nominee, she's actually not been doing too bad either. But he is capable of a variety of, rhetorical approaches, specifically because he's a DEI hire. He's the white guy. That, I think, play really fucking well with the, Joe America. So that's good. And I will say, so this is the one from the video about a year ago. That's the new Peggy album. It's very good. From that YouTube video that I guess I closed the tab of. So this is August 16, 2023. So literally nearly a year ago. So he's talking about the reactions Republicans had to Minnesota passing free school lunches for kindergarten through 12th grade.
Yeah, isn't that rich? Our Republican colleagues were concerned there would be a tax cut for the wealthiest. You can't make some of this up if you tried. The fact of the matter is that the programs of getting food get to our children as easily as possible has always been a priority. We know there's a lot of families that this is hard. They send you tons of paperwork. You're struggling. You're doing work. You're doing all that. This was meant to make it as easy as possible, knowing that it's a benefit for all of them. The haves and have-nots in a school lunchroom is not a necessary thing. They just feed our children. And so I'm really excited about that. I think coupled with these payments, we're feeling this. Going back to school looks a lot easier this year.
Hell yeah. So this is an anti-means testing approach of just give the kids the fucking food. Don't make parents who don't have a lot of time go through all the paperwork of do I make too much money for my child to get food? Just give them the fucking food. And like if you make like slightly too much money, you now have to pay out of pocket, but like it's still enough of a dent along with your other expenses that it's kind of not great for the broader quality of life. Like just give them the fuck. I don't give a fuck if a rich person going to a public school, like the child of a rich parent, gets food that everybody else there is eating. I do not give a fuck. Mostly because a lot of the money that's being used to pay for that money comes from those rich fucks anyway. So like, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a shit if my tax dollars go to help pay for a kid's lunch. That's a good thing, actually. And I will say, taxation is only theft if it doesn't go to rendering goods and services for the people that pay into it. And specifically the people with the least in this country, who have the least. Like, taxation can be theft in a way that, like, not taxing the mega wealthy and allowing them to hoard way more money than they know what to fucking do with, and making it so that kids go fucking hungry at lunch because the state doesn't have enough money to put into it or doesn't have the will because of those wealthy fucks. Like, that's a theft, man. Like, you're essentially robbing everybody else at a higher rate than they need to be to send money to fucking blow people up overseas. That's a bit of a simplification. But, like, there's better ways to use the tax revenues, and if people saw that those tax revenues are actually going to make everybody else's lives better, they'd be more okay with it. Like, people have always said, like, oh, if I could choose where my tax dollars went, like, they would be choosing to put it toward infrastructure. They'd be choosing to put it toward feeding kids. They'd be choosing to put it toward making sure people have housing, you know, all this kind of shit. Put it toward childcare. Put it toward higher education shit. Not goddamn the military that's fucking going on side quests across the fucking globe trying to extract oil out of countries that we shouldn't be in. Anyway, it's good stuff. Tim Walz. I think it's a good pick. It's the pick I wanted, and it's the pick I got. And I was talking about the motherfucker a goddamn year ago. This is a take for another. It's already been a long segment. Get me the hell out of here. Just know, Tim Walz is also very pro-union. We are very pro-freedom here. We are very pro-worker here. We are very pro-workers being able to bargain for better wages and working conditions. Frankly, I think the workers should have more power than the CEOs of said companies, because they're the ones that make the CEOs the money. And without the workers, the CEOs would be nothing. They would be dog shit. And as such, Tim Walz is very pro-union. Has been in Minnesota, and Kamala Harris does like talk about how unions are important. Joe Biden did too. Biden's NLRB has been fantastic compared to previous Democratic administrations for workers' rights, and as such, that's also a thing to be excited about a little bit, and hopefully, you know, hold them accountable for once they get into office, which, you know, they hopefully will. Pretty good.